They tried everything. Money, machines, the world's best doctors. But nothing could stop the illness that was killing her. Ava Whitmore, the most powerful CEO in the country, was fading fast. That is, until a single drop of blood from a man no one expected changed everything. He was a widowed veteran, a father, living quietly in the shadows. She was a woman who had never known love without conditions. Neither of them knew their lives were about to collide in a way that would heal more than just a body, but two broken hearts. Before we begin, if you believe in stories that warm the soul, that show how kindness can change destinies, and how love often comes from the most unexpected places, then you're in the right place. Take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, so you won't miss a single chapter of this unforgettable journey. Now, let's begin the story. The storm outside didn't ask for permission. It tore through the Manhattan skyline, drumming rain against the glass walls of Whitmore Tower like a war cry. Inside, the annual shareholders' meeting was in full swing. Hundreds of suits, screens flashing numbers, Ava Whitmore's voice razor-sharp as ever, slicing through tension with calculated grace. And then, silence. Not a graceful pause, not a dramatic beat, a collapse. The CEO of Whitmore Biotech, flawless, untouchable, unshakable, slumped forward mid-sentence, her face pale, her hands trembling before they fell limp by her sides. A wave of panic surged through the room. Security rushed the stage. Assistants fumbled with their phones. Her COO, Andrew Maddox, barked at paramedics as if he could command time. But Ava didn't move. At St. Joseph's Medical Center, doctors worked under blinding fluorescent lights. What was happening wasn't cardiac arrest, at least not in the traditional sense. Ava's body had entered some kind of toxic immune response, her nervous system attacking itself like a snake biting its tail. Every known medication failed. Her vitals plummeted. Oxygen dropped. 1 hour, 2. Then came the whisper that floats in all emergency rooms when brilliance alone isn't enough. We need a miracle. Meanwhile, 2 floors down in the blood donation unit, a man in a military-issue jacket with worn cuffs and a quiet posture sat patiently. Dr. James Rourke, 41, former U.S. Army field surgeon, now a part-time ER physician living paycheck to paycheck, was there for a simple reason. He donated blood every 6 weeks, not for the $50 stipend, not for recognition, just because it was the only habit that had survived his wife's funeral. The nurse pricked his vein, watched the deep red flow fill the bag, then paused. She squinted. The scanner blinked strangely. His blood showed atypical hemolytic behavior, something she'd never seen in a donor. A call was made upstairs. Another scan. Then a rush. "Sir, would you be willing to test for compatibility with a critical patient?" James didn't hesitate. "Hook me up." 42 minutes later, Ava's breathing stabilized. Not fully healed, but her immune system halted its attack. Her nervous tremors faded. The doctors couldn't explain it. James didn't try to. He'd been in battle zones where triage decisions felt like gambling with ghosts. But one thing was clear. His blood had saved her. 2 days later, Ava opened her eyes to sterile ceilings and white noise. Her memory blurred. She remembered a boardroom, a pain in her spine, falling. Then, nothing. Andrew sat by her bedside, exhausted but composed. "You're lucky, Ava," he said. "Your heart nearly stopped. They called in every specialist. Nothing worked, until they gave you blood from a walk-in donor. A nobody." She blinked, her voice a whisper. "Who?" "James Rourke, doctor, Army vet, widowed, currently working at a clinic in Brooklyn, refused to give an interview. Said he didn't do it for press. You offered him compensation." "How much?" $10 million. He turned it down. Ava frowned, struggling to sit up. "Get him here," But James had already disappeared. When the hospital contacted him again, he declined the invitation. He didn't even collect the check. When pressed for a reason, his reply was calm and surgical. "I'm not interested in being anyone's hero. I did what was needed. That's enough." The media got wind of it. "The billionaire saved by a stranger" headlined everywhere. But no one could pin down the man. No LinkedIn, no social media, no photos beyond an old military ID. He had refused interviews, declined Ava's legal team, and ignored corporate emissaries sent to negotiate. He even changed his phone number. That's when Ava's curiosity turned personal. She was not used to being ignored. Not as a CEO, not as a woman. Since the age of 14, she'd been the youngest in every room. Youngest valedictorian, youngest biotech patent holder, youngest to sit at the table with billion-dollar contracts. People listened when she spoke. They asked to listen. But this man, this ghost of a soldier, had saved her life and then disappeared like she was just another patient on a battlefield. And that bothered her. In her recovery suite, she sat by the window while rain returned to the city, softer this time. She held the anonymous blood donor report in one hand, her IV line in the other. "Dr. James Rourke," she said aloud, as if invoking his name would make him appear. 3 blocks away, James stood silently in his daughter's room, tucking in Amelia for the night. 10 years old, bright-eyed, a bookworm like her late mother. She had no idea her father had just saved the most powerful woman in New York. "Dad," she mumbled sleepily, "do you ever miss the army?" He paused. "Sometimes, but not the reasons I left." She was quiet, then asked, "Did you help someone today?" He looked out the window toward the city lights. "Yes," he said. "I helped someone." And that would be enough. For now. The first thing you'd notice walking into James Rourke's home was how quiet it was. Not in the cold, empty way that loneliness leaves behind, but in the way a man builds stillness around him like armor. The 2-bedroom apartment, nestled above a florist in the quieter part of Brooklyn, was sparse. Worn hardwood floors, mismatched chairs, and books stacked against the walls instead of trophies. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and chamomile. On the fridge were exactly 2 magnets, one shaped like a stethoscope, the other a photo of Amelia at age 5 holding a drawing of her late mother. James sat at the small dining table, sorting through paperwork, while Amelia worked through math homework beside him. Her hair was tied in a lopsided ponytail, a pencil between her teeth as she squinted at the numbers. "You know," she said without looking up, "if you let me get a cat, this place wouldn't feel so much like a bunker." He looked at her over the rim of his coffee mug. "Cats and asthma don't get along, kiddo. You had asthma when you were 5, not now. That's like banning pizza because you choked on it once." He smirked. It was a traumatic pizza. She rolled her eyes, then went back to writing. James was halfway through reviewing his patient charts when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. He let it ring. 10 seconds later, a text came in. "Mr. Rourke, please call back. This concerns Ava Whitmore's medical condition. Whitmore MedOps." He stared at it. There had been 5 calls in the past 2 days. 4 emails. 1 couriered envelope. All from the same company. All politely persistent. All ignored. Meanwhile, in a private lab inside Whitmore Biotech's executive clinic, Ava Whitmore sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly, as she watched the test results flicker onto the screen. The lead researcher adjusted his glasses. "We triple-checked. Your condition's progression isn't just halted, it's regressing. Nerve inflammation is down. Your autoimmune markers are stabilizing." Ava blinked. Because of his blood? Because of something in his blood. It's not just compatibility. His blood carries a rare antigenic structure that somehow rewires the neural immune communication. We've never seen anything like it. So I need more. The doctor hesitated. With his levels, we can't extract too frequently without causing harm. Ideally, we'd want access to him in a clinical setting. If he's open to longer-term contribution, he already declined. May I ask why? She exhaled, jaw tight. Because James Rourke doesn't want to be bought. That afternoon, James stood in the break room of the urgent care clinic where he worked weekends. He was pouring cold coffee into a paper cup when the door opened. The woman who entered didn't wear makeup or heels, just dark jeans, a navy coat, and the same eyes that had once commanded billion-dollar rooms. "Ava Whitmore," he said simply, as if she were a neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. "James. You tracked me down to a walk-in clinic. I'm thorough." He sipped his coffee. "Still not interested. I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to ask a favor, for clarity." He tilted his head. "You saved my life," she said. "I offered you $10 million, and you walked away without a word. I just want to understand why." James looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Because you thought that saving someone's life should be translatable into a check. You assumed that a life and death moment could be followed by a transaction. It was gratitude. It was ownership." Silence stretched between them. She took a slow breath. "All right. Let's say I get it. Let's say I accept that money offends you. What if I asked you to be involved not as a donor, but as a doctor?" He didn't react. "I want you to take over my case," she continued. "Be part of my recovery, medically, ethically. Your terms, your rules. No labs, no extraction beyond what's safe. No PR, just you and me. Doctor and patient." James sat down, carefully, like the chair might give out under the weight of what she'd just said. "I haven't practiced long-term in years. I'm barely holding this job. You were a field surgeon in Kandahar. You led mobile trauma units under fire. You're more qualified than anyone I've ever met." His eyes darkened. "And yet, I couldn't save my wife." Her expression softened. "That's not a disqualification, James. That's a reason why you care." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I don't want to be someone's miracle," he said finally. "People put you on a pedestal just to blame you when you fall off. I don't want a miracle. I want a partner in survival." The words lingered. Quiet. Heavy. Later that night, James stood by Amelia's bedside, watching her sleep. She looked so much like her mother, it hurt sometimes. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek and whispered, "I might take on something new. It could get complicated." Amelia, half awake, mumbled, "Does it help someone?" James hesitated. "Yes." "Then do it, Dad. You're good at helping people." And just like that, the man who'd once saved lives under mortar fire, who'd rebuilt himself from the rubble of grief, made a quiet decision that would ripple across both their lives. The next morning, Ava's assistant received a single-line reply. "I will take the case, but I don't belong to you. Dr. Rourke." The Whitmore Tower was a monument of glass and steel, 36 stories tall and surgically modern. It didn't whisper wealth, it announced it. The moment James Rourke stepped into the private elevator that would take him to the executive floor, he felt the air grow colder, denser. The kind of air that was filtered 6 times a day and smelled like power. He didn't flinch. He'd walked through hospitals mid-bombardment. He'd stitched soldiers together with 1 working hand and 2 minutes to live. But this felt like entering a different kind of battlefield. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a minimalist hallway, flanked by white marble and dark oak. A young assistant waited, hands folded, and bowed slightly. "Dr. Rourke, welcome. Miss Whitmore is expecting you." James nodded politely, briefcase in hand, jacket clean, shoes modest, but polished. Every move calculated, every breath measured. He followed the assistant past glass offices, motion sensor lighting, and walls that didn't carry sound. The world here was silent, like a luxury submarine cruising above the chaos of everyday life. They stopped at a set of tall, matte black double doors. The assistant tapped once. Ava's voice, calm but commanding, rang out. "Come in." The office was large enough to host a wedding. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. Ava stood near the edge, arms crossed, dressed in slate gray with a silver lapel pin shaped like the Whitmore Company crest. Her eyes narrowed slightly when she saw James. "You're punctual," she said. "Comes from being deployed," he replied simply. She gestured toward the chair in front of her desk. "Let's get to it." A printed contract waited between them, leather-bound and clinical. James flipped through the pages slowly, scanning the language. Medical autonomy, full patient transparency, strict confidentiality, security clearance, access to her vitals, labs, neuroimmunology scans, on-call availability, and one line he had specifically requested. Under no circumstances shall the minor child of Dr. Rourke be subject to visitation, inquiry, or media exposure. Ava noticed where his eyes paused. "You're protective." "She's 10. I'm not negotiating that," she exhaled. "You realize I employ 3 publicists, 2 in-house attorneys, and a crisis team that monitors my brand in real time. Secrecy isn't a suggestion, it's survival." "Then we understand each other." He signed with a pen she offered, brass and weighted like a gavel. As the ink dried, Ava watched him in silence, her eyes searching his face as if looking for some residual trace of heroism. But James didn't give her anything. No self-congratulation, no warmth, only professional neutrality. It was disarming in a world where everyone wanted something. That evening, Ava stared at his personnel file on her tablet, alone in her penthouse suite. It wasn't enough. She wanted to know who he was, not just what he'd done. He was a mystery, a man who gave so little of himself it almost felt intentional. So she called in a favor. 10 minutes later, a secure file arrived from a private investigator who owed her 3 lives and a non-disclosure agreement. It was long, annotated, classified at parts. But the highlight, the first sharp jab to the chest, was his military medical citation. Lieutenant Colonel James Rourke, U.S. Army recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for extreme valor and medical innovation under live fire. Credited with pioneering mobile trauma response units during the Kandahar offensives. Dozens of lives saved. Wounds stabilized under duress. Field protocols now standard across NATO operations. But deeper down in the file, the tone shifted. There was a section marked Personal History. Redacted. She decrypted it using her internal keycard access. What she read next made her stomach twist. Name: Emily Rourke. Date of death: May 9th. Place of death: All Saints Memorial Hospital. Cause: adverse drug interaction. Opioid antagonist mislabeled as sedative. Attending physician: James Rourke. There was a note attached. 1 line, cold and clinical. Doctor withdrew from surgical practice 28 days after incident. Ava placed the tablet down carefully, as if it might break under the weight of its content. He had tried to save her too, his own wife, and failed. The next morning, James entered the clinical suite assigned to him on the 34th floor. It had everything he needed: smart displays, lab access, neural imaging tools, and a direct connection to Ava's biometric data. But the air felt different now. She hadn't spoken to him since he signed the contract. Her assistants did the scheduling. The blood samples arrived on trays. There was no small talk, not until that afternoon. She walked in without warning, no heels this time, just quiet steps and unreadable eyes. "You could have said no," she said, standing by the window. "I've said no many times." "But you didn't this time." He paused, putting down a report. "Because your case interests me." Or because you needed to be reminded what healing someone feels like? He looked at her sharply. You read the file? I had to. James didn't respond. His hands clenched around the chair's edges. Ava didn't apologize. She didn't back away. Instead, she spoke softly. Losing someone, and still having the courage to keep helping others? That's not weakness. That's purpose. I'm not a hero, Ms. Whitmore. I'm a man who made a mistake he has to live with. So am I. They stood there, the city buzzing beneath them like a far-off memory neither of them trusted anymore. Later that night, James sat on the floor of his daughter's bedroom, folding laundry as Amelia told him about her spelling bee. You know, she said, I looked her up. The woman you're helping. James raised a brow. Did you? She's all over the news. People say she's cold. Some say she's brilliant. Some say both. And what do you think? Amelia shrugged. I think anyone who still shows up every day, even when people hate them, is probably more brave than we think. James looked at her, heart quietly breaking in the best way. You might be smarter than most adults, he said. She grinned. I know I am. The contract was signed. The boundaries were drawn. But in the shadows of pain and precision, two hearts, guarded by grief and hardened by the past, had just taken their first reluctant step towards something neither of them expected, and something neither of them was ready to name. The city never truly slept, but it did pause, between 2 and 4 now a.m., when even the taxi horns softened and the skyscrapers blinked slower, like titans lulled into rest. Ava Whitmore lay wide awake in her penthouse, sweat clinging to her collarbone despite the perfect temperature, her chest rising in shallow, unsteady breaths. Again. Another nightmare. She stared at the ceiling, trying to grasp what had chased her this time. A war zone of shadows, a collapsing stage, faces without mouths, screaming silently. And always, in the middle of it all, herself, watching but unable to move. For weeks since the incident, her body had improved. Tests were promising, motor responses better, nerve inflammation decreased. The doctors whispered about remission. But her nights were filled with echoes. At 3:07 a.m., barefoot in silk pajamas and a long cashmere robe, Ava moved through the 34th floor of Whitmore Tower like a ghost. No security, no assistant, just the hum of climate control and the soft buzz of refrigerated panels. She pushed open the door to the private medical suite. The lights were off except for one reading lamp in the far corner. And there he was. James Rourke, seated in the armchair beside the medical desk, legs crossed, a book in one hand and his phone in the other. The screen was angled just enough for her to see it wasn't a call. It was a video chat. On the screen, a little girl lay curled under floral sheets, a stuffed owl in her arms. And the paper dragon flew higher and higher, James read softly, voice low, patient, full of rhythm, until it realized it wasn't fire that made it dangerous. It was its heart that made it rare. Amelia smiled sleepily, her eyes fluttering closed. Night, Dad, she whispered. Night, love, he replied. You did great today. The screen dimmed. James closed the book. He turned his head and found Ava standing in the doorway, unmoving, expression unreadable. She didn't speak for a moment. Neither did he. Then she said, almost too quietly, Was that the paper dragon? He nodded. It's her favorite. My wife used to read it to her. Ava stepped inside slowly, arms crossed, as if hugging her own ribs. I haven't heard that story since I was 10. James offered no reaction. He simply stood, setting the book down, clearing the table in silence. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. I figured, he said. The meds aren't responsible. Nightmares? Yes. He motioned to the chair across from his. Sit. She hesitated, then obeyed. For a long moment they sat there without words. Two people in a sterile room designed for survival, not comfort. Finally, James broke the silence. Nightmares aren't always about trauma, he said. Sometimes they're just your body begging you to slow down. Slowing down was never in the manual, Ava said dryly. You wrote your own manual. She didn't laugh, but she didn't scowl either. My father used to tell me that rest was indulgent, she said after a pause. That sleep was for the safe, not for the strong. Your father sounds like a general. He was a surgeon. James looked at her. So was mine, she added. Emotionally, at least. That earned a faint, knowing smile from him. Ava leaned back slightly, her voice softer now. I've had everything. Private jets, Ivy League degrees, more homes than I can visit in a year. But for the first time, I don't know how to deal with the one thing I can't control, being afraid. James leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice grounded. Fear's not weakness, it's a warning, the body's version of wisdom. She met his eyes. And what if I ignore it? Then it finds another way to remind you. Nightmares, panic, isolation. Eventually, illness. She lowered her gaze. Maybe that's how I ended up here in the first place. Silence returned, but it wasn't cold. It had shifted, become shared, not imposed. You're good with her, Ava said suddenly. James raised a brow. Amelia, the way you spoke to her, the way she smiled. You're raising her alone? He nodded. I envy that. That surprised him. You envy being a single parent? No, I envy having someone who looks at you like that, like you're the center of their world. She stood, wrapping the robe tighter around her frame. Her vulnerability was raw, but not fragile, just honest. I should go, she murmured. James didn't stop her, but as she reached the door, she turned back. That quote, she said. The one about the dragon's heart, it's not in the original version. He smiled faintly. I added it. For Amelia. Ava held his gaze. I think, she said slowly, you're not just helping me recover physically. I think your blood's doing something else too. James said nothing. I feel lighter when you're in the room, she continued. Not just my body, my head, my heart. His jaw tensed. That's not science. No, she said. It's something more dangerous. Back in her suite, Ava sat on the edge of her bed and stared out at the city. The insomnia hadn't gone, but it had changed shape, become quieter, less lonely. She didn't sleep that night. But for the first time in weeks, she didn't fear the dark either. The Whitmore rooftop garden was a private oasis, tucked between glass towers and humming air units. Ava had it built to remind herself there was still life above concrete. And now, for the first time in weeks, she invited someone else into it. Not James. His daughter. Amelia sat across from her, legs swinging slightly from the bench, cradling a cup of hot cocoa Ava had insisted be made with 3 marshmallows, not 2. The girl was polite, poised, but didn't fidget like most children her age. There was an old soul in her eyes, like someone who had seen too much, too early. You don't have to say anything, Ava said gently. I just thought we could talk. Amelia looked at her thoughtfully. Dad said I should only be here for 15 minutes. Ava nodded. That's fair. They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of leaves shifting in the wind above them. You're the lady he saved, Amelia said suddenly. Ava blinked. Yes, I suppose I am. Amelia didn't smile. Amelia, do you know what it cost him to save someone before? The question hung in the air like fog. Ava shook her head. No. Amelia's eyes dropped to the steam rising from her cocoa. It cost him everything. Ava's throat tightened. You mean, your mother? She was in the hospital, the girl said quietly. Not this one, a different one. Dad knew something was wrong. He warned them the meds could clash, that they weren't tested for her condition. He told them twice. They didn't listen. A beat. Then she died, that same night. Ava could barely breathe. He got angry, Amelia continued. He shouted, not like scary shouting, but like someone who'd lost a part of his soul. Ava leaned forward. What happened to him after that? They told him he overstepped, that he made the hospital look bad. So he left. Or maybe they made him leave. I don't know which. Amelia looked up now, eyes sharp and wise beyond her years. So, when he says no to helping you too much, it's not because he's mean. It's because he already gave too much once, and no one gave anything back. Ava stood frozen in the elevator. She had excused herself calmly, even smiled at Amelia. But inside her chest, thunder cracked. When the elevator doors opened, James was waiting outside the lab. His face was steel. You went around me, he said flatly. You spoke to my daughter. I asked. She agreed, Ava replied, trying to stay calm. She's 10. You're the most powerful woman in the state. What part of that feels like consent to you? His voice didn't rise, but the force behind it was undeniable. I wasn't interrogating her. You were manipulating her. I wasn't, Ava said, stepping closer. She told me about your wife. James's jaw clenched. That's not her story to tell. No, James, it's yours. But you never did. You treat me like a stranger holding a needle, but I'm the one who almost died. I deserve to know why the man who saved me can barely look me in the eye. His voice cracked this time. Because every time I do, I remember what it cost me to care. Ava faltered. The room swelled with unspoken truths. Pain clashed with pride, grief with guilt. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ava said quietly, I looked into it. Into the records. James stiffened. You reported the interaction, she continued. 3 times. About the cross-reaction risk in the medication. You logged everything. You were ignored. James closed his eyes. Ava, stop. You didn't lose your career because you were reckless. You lost it because you weren't. Because no one wanted to admit they were wrong until it was too late. James's voice was a whisper now. I told them she had an autoimmune variant, that the immunosuppressants would shut her down if they were dosed together. But they didn't want delays. She was just another patient on a clock. And they killed her. His eyes opened, red-rimmed but blazing. Yes, he said. They did. Later that night, Ava sat alone in her study, surrounded by open case files and medical memos she had retrieved through private legal channels. Some were heavily redacted, others eerily clear. Her hands shook as she turned the final page, the autopsy notes. It was all there. Dates, names, warnings, filed and ignored. She now held the truth that had haunted James in silence for years. He hadn't just been a doctor. He had been right. The next morning, Ava stood at the front door of the guest apartment, where James and Amelia were staying on the Whitmore campus. She knocked. No response. She knocked again. The door opened slowly. James looked at her, exhausted, guarded. I didn't come to fight, Ava said. I came to apologize. He said nothing. I crossed a line, she admitted. I was so desperate to understand you, I forgot to respect the wall you built to protect what matters most. Still, silence. I read it all, she added. Everything. About your wife. About the negligence. You weren't just a good doctor, James. You were a better one than most people deserved. He exhaled slowly. And I think you were right to walk away. But I also think maybe it's time someone actually listened. There was a pause. Then James opened the door wider, just enough for her to step inside. Coffee? He asked. No, Ava said, with the hint of a smile. But I'd love a cup of Amelia's cocoa. James allowed himself a breath of something that almost resembled peace. 3 marshmallows, he said. Ava nodded. Always. The message came just past noon, tucked between corporate memos and board meeting reminders on Ava's phone. A simple text, sent from an unfamiliar number. Hi, Ms. Ava. Tomorrow is my birthday. I didn't invite many people, but if you're not too busy, would you come? Amelia. P.S. Dad doesn't know I'm texting you. Please don't be mad. Ava stared at the message for longer than she should have. The corner of her mouth lifted, soft, uncertain. It wasn't a corporate invitation sealed in gold. It wasn't a strategic alliance or a publicity stunt. It was an honest request, handwritten in digital ink, from a child who'd watched her father laugh far too rarely. And for once, Ava didn't think twice. The next evening, she arrived quietly, holding a medium-sized box wrapped in blue tissue and tied with a string bow that took her an hour to figure out. She wore jeans, her assistant nearly fainted at the idea, and a simple navy sweater. No makeup, no security detail, just Ava. The neighborhood was unremarkable, a row of low-rent duplexes tucked between an elementary school and a tired strip mall. The kind of place no one expected to find the CEO of Whitmore Biotech wandering after dark. A middle-aged woman watering plants 2 doors down looked up and blinked in surprise. You here for the birthday girl? Ava smiled. Yes, Amelia. The woman squinted, then smiled wider. You must be the new stepmom. Ava froze. The woman laughed. She talks about you like you're a fairy godmother. You're lucky. James hasn't let anyone near her since her mother. Ava's voice caught for a second. I'm not. I'm just a friend. The woman gave her a knowing smile. That's how it always starts. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and baked apples. Balloons with slightly deflated edges floated near the ceiling, and a hand-drawn sign that read, Happy 11th Amelia, hung crookedly above the kitchen counter. James opened the door, surprised, but not unkind. He was wearing a soft plaid shirt and jeans, his hair slightly tousled. You got her message. I did, Ava replied. She's grounded for using my phone, he said dryly. But not tonight. A voice chirped from behind him. Amelia appeared, dressed in a bright yellow dress, her grin stretching from ear to ear. She launched into a hug before Ava could even kneel down. You came, the girl whispered, as if afraid saying it too loudly might make it untrue. Of course I did, Ava replied, her throat tightening. Dinner was simple. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a store-bought cake decorated with plastic figurines from a cartoon Ava had never heard of. But it was the laughter that filled the room like a symphony. James made the worst dad jokes Ava had ever heard. Amelia rolled her eyes dramatically. Ava, to her own shock, laughed, really laughed, until she had to wipe her eyes. At one point, she dropped her fork from sheer joy, and no one cared. They were a picture no one would have believed. A widowed ex-military medic, his bright-eyed daughter, and a billion-dollar CEO, all sitting at a wobbly kitchen table with paper napkins and mismatched plates. It was so normal it hurt. After cake, James got up to clean, and Amelia pulled Ava aside, leading her into the living room, where family photos lined the wall above the fireplace. There, nestled between kindergarten art and a faded American flag, was a wedding portrait. James stood in full dress uniform, his arms wrapped around a woman with soft auburn hair and eyes that sparkled with laughter even in a still frame. Her gaze was locked on him, not the camera. And in that gaze was something Ava recognized, not from her past, but from her longing, a kind of love that saw everything and stayed anyway. She was beautiful, Ava whispered. Amelia nodded solemnly. She made up bedtime songs, and she could braid hair really fast. Ava felt her throat tighten. I bet she was amazing. She was, the girl said with a small smile. But sometimes, I think Dad's been sad so long, he forgets how to be anything else. A beat passed. You make him less sad. Ava looked down. I don't know if that's true. It is, Amelia insisted. When he talks about you, he gets all weird. Not like sad weird. More like he's remembering something he thought he lost. Later, as James walked her to the door, Ava hesitated on the threshold. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. For surviving my daughter's sugar high? For intruding on your life? For not understanding sooner? James leaned against the doorframe. You brought a handmade gift, ate grocery store cake, listened to Amelia's stuffed animal opera. You're officially absolved. Ava chuckled, then turned serious. She showed me the wedding photo. James's smile faded. She looked at you, Ava said softly, like you were the only thing that mattered. He nodded slowly. She was. The center of everything. And now? Ava asked, her voice barely audible. James didn't answer at first. Then, in a voice that felt like gravel smoothed by rain, he said, Now I'm trying to remember what life feels like when it's not about surviving. They stood in silence, two people tethered by shared brokenness and moments neither dared name. Ava finally stepped back. Thank you for dinner, she said, and for letting me be part of something real. James opened the door a little wider. Maybe next time, it won't take a secret text. Ava smiled, and for the first time, it reached all the way to her eyes. Maybe next time, she said. The boardroom was colder than usual, both in temperature and tone. Frosted glass wrapped the walls in a sterile hush, muting the city's rhythm beyond. Ava sat at the head of the table, her jaw tight, spine upright, refusing to betray the tremor in her fingertips. Opposite her stood Dr. Harris Lynn, the newly appointed chief medical consultant for Whitmore Biotech, a man with credentials that stretched longer than most resumes, but with eyes that darted to the COO more often than they should. Andrew Bishop sat beside him, arms crossed, brow etched in deliberate concern. His tailored suit whispered quiet dominance, but his eyes burned with something else, frustration, or perhaps something older. There's a risk, Harris said. Repeated infusions of the same donor's blood, especially one with unidentifiable anomalies, may cause cerebral inflammation. We're already seeing mild neurological echoes, irregular REM sleep, serotonin misfiring, early-stage memory compression. Ava stiffened. You're saying my brain is breaking? I'm saying we don't fully understand what's happening yet, Harris replied, cautious. And that continued exposure may accelerate cognitive damage. Andrew leaned in. There's a cleaner way, controlled, replicable. CRISPR. We can map James's blood markers, isolate the mutation, and introduce it synthetically into your genome. Safely. No, Ava said firmly. Harris blinked. Ms. Whitmore. I said no. Her voice sharpened like glass against stone. CRISPR isn't stable. We don't fully understand its long-term effects, and I won't be someone's petri dish just to make things easier. Andrew exhaled hard through his nose. This isn't about easier. It's about survival. You're playing roulette with your life, Ava. Her gaze snapped to his. I've survived worse. The air turned leaden. Later, in her private office, Ava poured herself a glass of water with shaking hands. The mention of her symptoms, subtle, buried, and unspoken until now, made her blood run colder than Harris's charts ever could. She'd noticed the changes, the sudden migraines, the flashes of déjà vu, the nights she woke up forgetting where she was. But she'd written them off as stress. The board, James, Amelia. Feelings she didn't know how to name. But now, it had a word: damage. She stared at her reflection in the glass walls, then whispered aloud, as if confessing to someone unseen. What if the cure really is killing me? The door opened without a knock. Andrew never had the courtesy for walls. "You're not invincible," he said, stepping inside. "I never claimed to be." "You used to think you were," he said with a bitter laugh. "When you walked away from our wedding with a 3-sentence email and a new headquarters lease in your hand." She didn't rise to the bait. "This isn't about us," she said. "The hell it's not," Andrew snapped. "I was going to build a life with you. You chose a company instead. Now you're building that same company on the blood of a broken man with a kid." Ava stood. "Don't you dare," his voice cracked. "I loved you. And I loved you enough not to drag you into the fire with me." Silence. He stepped closer. "Is that what James is now? The new fire?" She turned away, but the sting in her eyes betrayed her. "James is not anything to me. He saved my life, that's all. But now he's part of it," Andrew said, softer. "More than I ever was." The words hung there, unsaid but heard. "You never let me in. But you're letting him in." She didn't answer. Couldn't. He stepped back. "CRISPR is the future. James isn't. You need to choose." Meanwhile, James stood at the children's wing of the hospital, watching 2 young nurses wave goodbye to Amelia after her routine checkup. She skipped toward him, her pink sneakers lighting up with every hop. "Guess what?" she chirped. "I drew a unicorn with 3 wings. The nurse said it's very expressive." He laughed. "That sounds about right." As they walked out, a man in a charcoal suit stepped in front of them, tall, manicured, and radiating expensive impatience. "Mr. Rourke," Andrew said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. James instinctively stepped in front of his daughter. "You are?" "Andrew Bishop. I'm COO of Whitmore Biotech, Ava's former fiancé." James said nothing. "I'm here to tell you, off the record, that your blood is endangering her life, and that continuing this little savior act of yours isn't heroism, it's recklessness." James narrowed his eyes. "She's not telling you because she thinks she can manage it," Andrew continued. "But if she dies, her board will bury you. Her legacy will erase you." James's jaw tightened. "Then maybe you should talk to her, not threaten me." "I already did," Andrew said, stepping closer. "She won't listen to reason. But maybe you're the key." James glanced at Amelia, whose grip on his hand had grown tighter. "Stay away from us," he said, his voice low and steady. "This isn't a war you want to start." Andrew didn't move. It already started the day she let you into her bloodstream. That night, Ava sat alone on the rooftop of the Whitmore Tower, city lights shimmering below like constellations, trying to remind her the world was bigger than her body. Her fingers gripped the railing, white-knuckled. Her mind played back Harris's voice, Andrew's accusations, James's silence. She was unraveling, and she knew it. A soft ping broke the moment, a message from James. "We need to talk, tomorrow, just us." She replied without hesitation. Yes. But in her heart, she wondered if just us would be enough, against everything else that had already begun to fall apart. The flames painted the night in orange grief. By the time Ava screeched her car to a halt outside the modest house on Cedar Lane, smoke was already choking the air. A neighbor had rushed out with a garden hose, but the fire laughed at the water, wild and feral. Inside, through the flickering curtains, Ava could see shadows moving, tiny, frantic. Amelia. Without hesitation, she sprinted forward, ignoring the screaming in her lungs. The front door was cracked open. She pushed through. The heat slapped her. Smoke clawed at her eyes. But Ava didn't stop. "Amelia!" she yelled. A faint cry answered. from the hallway. She ducked low and stumbled forward, knees scraping wood, arms outstretched. Then, small fingers, trembling, found her wrist. Amelia's face was streaked with soot and tears, coughing uncontrollably. "I'm here," Ava whispered, wrapping her arms around the girl. "I've got you." With every ounce of strength, she carried Amelia toward the door, just as part of the ceiling gave way behind them with a deafening crack. Fire licked at their heels as they burst outside, collapsing into the cold grass. James's car screeched in from the corner, gravel spitting beneath his tires. He barely stopped before leaping out. "Amelia!" he cried. She ran into his arms, still coughing, still shaking. Ava sat frozen on the lawn, her chest heaving. Her blazer was scorched, her palms blistered. But her eyes never left James. The next morning, what remained of the house was a smoldering skeleton. Blackened beams, charred memories. Years of grief and quiet healing turned to ash in one careless night. The fire department had ruled it an electrical accident. Faulty wiring, they said. Outdated sockets, maybe a power surge. But James wasn't buying it. Not after he'd rewired that house himself. Not after a neighbor mentioned seeing a man in a dark coat outside the night before, pacing like he didn't belong. Not after what Andrew had said. He stared at the ruins, Amelia clutching his hand, her head resting against his hip. "You're not safe here," Ava said quietly, standing beside him. "I know. You can move into the Whitmore compound, full security, private floor, guards. No one touches you." James shook his head. "No. You nearly lost your daughter, James." He turned to her then, his voice rough. "Because of me. Because I got too close to a world that doesn't know how to love without destroying things." Ava flinched. James looked away, jaw tight. "You think this was random? That it's coincidence the fire happened 2 days after your ex threatened me?" She didn't answer. "Tell me you know this wasn't just some fuse." She stayed silent. He nodded once. "Exactly." A moment passed. Then he said, "We're leaving. Today." Ava stepped closer. "Don't. I have to. James, you're the only reason I'm alive. And Amelia's the only reason I live," he said. "I won't let her become collateral damage in a war I never asked to fight." Her voice cracked. "You're not just some donor." He looked at her, eyes clouded. "Ava, I was never just a donor, and you know it." That afternoon, the sun burned down on a silent parking lot outside a long-term motel 2 towns over. James stood with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Amelia waited by the open car door, her stuffed unicorn poking out of her backpack. Ava had come, not to argue, not to plead, just to see. She watched as James handed the motel clerk a credit card, watched the way he glanced back at Amelia every 10 seconds, protective instincts always humming. "You don't belong here," she said finally. "I don't belong there either," he replied. Her voice was soft. "You belong with people who see you for who you are." James turned to her, expression unreadable. "And what do you see?" She swallowed. "A man who's still grieving, still running, but also the only man who didn't walk away when I was at my worst." He looked down, as if the words stung more than soot in a wound. She stepped forward, pressed a small folder into his hands. "What is this?" "Backups, every drop of your medical research, all the lab notes, mapped blood analyses, everything we learned while you treated me. Keep it. Start over if you want." He opened the folder slightly, scanning the pages. His breath caught. "You shouldn't have." "I needed to," she interrupted. "Because I may be your patient, James, but I'm not your chain. I won't hold you back." James blinked hard. "Promise me something," she whispered. "What? If?" Her voice shook. "If I relapse again. Don't come back out of guilt. Only come back if your heart tells you to." A long silence. Then James did something unexpected. He stepped forward, gently cupped her cheek, and whispered, "If I come back, it'll be because I can't stay away." Then he walked away. 2 weeks later, Ava collapsed. It happened during a routine investor dinner. One moment she was smiling, poised as ever, delivering a toast. The next, her words slurred, her hand trembled, and her legs gave out. She was rushed to the hospital, unconscious before the ambulance arrived. By the time Harris Lynn reviewed the test results, his hands were shaking. "The neurological regression is accelerating," he said grimly to the board. "Without James's blood, she doesn't have more than 10 days. Andrew's face paled. "You said CRISPR could work," a board member barked. It was a theory, and she refused it. Andrew stared at the floor, jaw clenched. No one spoke the obvious. She chose James over science, and now she was dying for it. But in the quiet room, a phone began to ring. And far from the city, in a motel room filled with too many ghosts, James stared at the caller ID. Whitmore Medical. He didn't answer. Not yet. James sat by the hospital bed, arms folded tightly across his chest. The beep of monitors in the room behind him marked Ava's life in cold, unrelenting rhythm. He hadn't gone inside. Not once. Instead, he stared at the tiled floor of the waiting room as if he could vanish into it. "Dr. Rourke," a nurse whispered, handing him a clipboard. "They're asking again, just for a signature." He took it without speaking, signed blindly, and handed it back. Paperwork meant nothing when you'd already lost what mattered. "She's awake," the nurse added gently. James didn't look up. That doesn't change anything. When Ava opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the sterile ceiling. The second was her own hand. IV line taped to her wrist, trembling with weakness. And the third was the empty chair by her bedside. He hadn't come. Again, Dr. Harris entered with a soft knock, his voice low. "Vitals are holding, but barely. The blood transfusion bought us hours, not days. We've called him 3 times. He refuses." Ava's lips were dry. "Where is he?" "He's still in the hospital. Just not here." She nodded slowly. Emotion shuddered behind tired eyes. "Then I'll go to him." "Miss Whitmore, you're not—" "I wasn't asking permission." James didn't flinch when Ava stepped into the family consultation room. His gaze stayed on the window, blank and gray with drizzle. "You should be resting," he said flatly. "I'll rest when I'm not dying," she replied. A beat, then another. James stood. "You're stronger than this. Don't flatter me. You've made it clear what you want." "You think this is what I want?" His voice cracked open, raw, frayed. "You almost died. My blood's no cure. It's a chain." "I chose that chain," Ava snapped, "because it gave me more than just time. It gave me clarity." James looked away. Ava's voice softened. "Do you know what I saw the night of the fire? I saw a father break open at the thought of losing his child. And then I saw that same man build a wall so fast around himself, no one could reach him again." He said nothing. "You're not punishing me, James. You're punishing yourself." He finally looked at her then, eyes full of grief and something deeper. "Because I failed. My wife died in a hospital just like this one. And I was there. I did everything right. And it wasn't enough. She wasn't your failure. She was my everything." A long pause fell between them, and then, quietly, Ava said, "Let me speak to Amelia." They met on the rooftop garden, an old helipad turned quiet sanctuary. The sky hung low, bruised with storm clouds. Amelia sat on the bench in her school jacket, swinging her feet nervously. "I'm sorry I dragged you into all this," Ava began. Amelia shook her head. "I invited you, remember?" They shared a small, sad smile. "He used to smile more," Amelia whispered. Before Mom died, he read bedtime stories in funny voices, danced in the kitchen. Ava looked at her. Do you miss that version of him? Amelia nodded. Sometimes I think he left with her, the part of him that loved the world. Ava's voice was soft. He still loves the world. He just loves it quietly now. Amelia hesitated. You make him afraid. Ava blinked. What? Not in a bad way, the girl clarified. It's just, if he cares about someone again, it means he can lose again. Those words hung in the air, heavy and beautiful. Amelia tilted her head. But maybe that's the only way he heals. Loving again. Ava swallowed hard. Amelia slipped her a folded piece of paper. He wrote this last night. I found it in his jacket. He didn't send it. Ava opened it. It was addressed to Emily. My dearest Em, I keep hearing your laugh when Amelia leaves socks in the fridge again. You'd roll your eyes and say, she's your daughter, you know. And you'd be right. I failed you. Not because you died. I know death isn't something even the best doctors can outrun. I failed you because I stopped living after you were gone. I thought grief was loyalty. But now I wonder if love, true love, asks for more than silence and shadow. There's someone. She's complicated, strong, the kind of strong that makes you want to be better, not just for her, but for yourself. And I hate that I care, because caring means risking again. But not caring, it's not life, it's just survival. I miss you, Em. I'll always love you. But maybe the best way to honor your love is to not die with you. Yours, always, James. That night, Ava sat alone in her hospital room, holding the letter in her hands, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew now. He wasn't gone. Not really. His heart had just been waiting for permission. And maybe, just maybe, it had come from the only voice he'd never stop listening to. His daughters. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore Tower hadn't seen this many cameras in years. Reporters packed shoulder to shoulder beneath glittering chandeliers, their lenses trained on the sleek, steel podium at the center of the stage. On the massive digital screen behind it, bold white letters blazed. Breakthrough in genetic therapy. Whitmore unveils the future. Andrew Monroe stood tall, tailored to perfection, his smile clinical and triumphant. As chief operating officer, he was no stranger to attention, but today was different. Today, he intended to make headlines that would last generations. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice amplified and crisp. What we present today is not just a treatment. It is a revolution. Slides flicked behind him. DNA strands, neural mapping, graphs charting cellular repair. The audience nodded, some visibly impressed. Andrew paused just long enough to let the buzz grow. Our CRISPR-based protocol has passed preclinical simulations, and with the board's approval, he said, glancing at Ava seated to his right. We begin human trials next quarter, starting, naturally, with our own CEO. Polite applause followed, but Ava didn't move. Andrew leaned closer to the mic, adding, We believe this therapy will render prior experimental interventions obsolete, including, unfortunately, the unconventional plasma-based protocol some of you may have heard about. There it was, the veiled attack. Ava stood. Cameras snapped to attention. Andrew looked at her, startled. I'm afraid I can't support this announcement, she said, her voice calm but resolute. The room froze. Murmurs rippled across the media pit. Andrew blinked. Ava, we've discussed. I'm still CEO, Andrew, she cut in, and I have something to say. She stepped to the podium, her heels echoing like war drums. When she looked out into the sea of faces, her spine was straight, her expression unreadable. "I've been fighting a rare degenerative disease for over a year," she began. "Many of you know that. What you don't know is how close I came to dying. Not once, but multiple times." She glanced toward the back of the room. "No James." But she continued. "There was no cure, no trial, no miracle drug. There was only one thing that gave me time. A blood transfusion. From a man who never asked to be in the spotlight. A man who once served this country, lost his wife in a hospital that failed her, and still found it in his heart to save a stranger." The silence was absolute now. "I offered him $10 million, Ava said. "He refused. Not once, not twice, every time. Because some things, you don't put a price tag on." Andrew stepped forward, face tightening. "Ava, with all due respect, personal anecdotes are not policy. We are a biotech firm. We deal in facts." "Then let me give you one," Ava said, turning toward the audience again. "The man who saved my life, James Rourke, is the same doctor who 5 years ago filed a report warning of a drug interaction that led to the death of his wife. A report that was ignored by a hospital board seeking faster approvals." The room exploded. Reporters shouted over each other. Microphones lunged forward. One journalist stood up with a tablet in hand. "Is it true the case was buried?" Ava nodded. "Until last week, when I reopened the investigation." Andrew's face paled. "And now," she continued, her voice rising above the noise, "the evidence has cleared his name. He didn't fail her. The system did." Twist dropped. Silence again. Then applause. Slow at first, then rising. Andrew's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Ava stepped back, breathing unevenly. Not from sickness, but release. 5 years of injustice undone in 5 minutes. Later, in the quiet of her office, Ava sat by the window overlooking the city. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer emotional weight of what had just unfolded. The door opened softly behind her. She didn't turn. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. James's voice came low, gentle. "Neither did I." He stood behind her in silence for a moment. Then, "You didn't have to defend me like that." "I wasn't defending you," Ava said, still facing the skyline. "I was defending truth." A pause. "I thought you'd hate me," she whispered, "for turning it all public." He stepped closer. "You gave me back something I didn't think I deserved." She turned to face him, eyes searching his. "What's that?" He hesitated. "A voice." For the first time in days, she smiled. It was small, but real. "You gave me more than that, James. You gave me time. Breath. A chance to feel alive again. I didn't want anything in return. I know," she whispered. "That's what makes it mean everything." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time the walls around him began to crack. "I didn't come here to be your hero, Ava." "I didn't need one," she replied. "I needed someone who saw me when I stopped seeing myself." Silence wrapped around them, warm and full. Then James asked, "What happens now?" Ava looked out at the city again. "Now? We keep going. And maybe this time, not alone." Outside, the media still buzzed with the story of the man who refused $10 million. But inside that room, something far greater had been earned. Respect, redemption, and the fragile beginnings of something that didn't yet have a name, but was real. And that, more than any press release, would last. The rain began sometime after midnight. It wasn't a gentle lullaby of water on rooftops. It was a furious, urgent downpour, pounding against hospital windows like the fists of a world refusing to sleep. The ER lights buzzed under pressure. Nurses moved quickly, voices clipped and trembling with urgency. James Rourke stood frozen in the doorway of Amelia's room, his military calm cracking with each second that passed. His daughter was seizing, her small body so full of life and laughter, now lay limp on the gurney, her skin pale and clammy, lips tinged blue. The doctors shouted orders. The monitors blared red. The attending's voice was sharp, precise. "We need blood. O negative. Cross-match failed. Platelets are collapsing." James tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. "I can give mine," he began. "You already have," the doctor cut in. "She's built antibodies after repeated transfusions. We can't risk another." James gripped the edge of the doorway. "Then find someone." "We're trying." But the clock was louder than hope. Then the doors burst open. Dripping wet, her designer coat soaked through, heels echoing with unrelenting resolve, Ava Whitmore strode in like a storm sent from the gods. "I'm O negative," she said. The nurse hesitated. "Ms. Whitmore, your condition." "I said take it," Ava snapped, unbuttoning her sleeve. "Now." James turned, stunned. "Ava, no. Your immune system's still weak." She looked at him, not as a CEO, not as a patient, but as a woman who had chosen her fight. "She's your daughter," she said quietly, "which means she's part of my life too." And without waiting for his permission, she offered her arm. The nurse moved quickly. The blood bag filled slowly, red against glass, thick with silent sacrifice. 2 hours later, the storm outside had dulled to a steady hush. But inside the ICU, the true storm had just passed. Amelia's vitals stabilized. The fever broke. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, even rhythm. She was safe. But Ava wasn't. James sat at her bedside, the IV drip hissing softly beside her, her face too pale for comfort. She looked like she was sleeping, but her breath was shallow, her lips dry. The doctor entered, hesitant. She collapsed from acute blood volume depletion. Her levels were already borderline. She shouldn't have stood up, let alone donated. James stared at Ava. His throat tightened. The doctor added, "But she may have just saved your daughter's life." The moment the doctor left, James reached for Ava's hand. Cold, delicate. He'd seen men bleed out in war zones. He'd seen heroes fall with medals on their chests and fear in their eyes. But this was different. This wasn't duty. It wasn't protocol. This was love. Quiet, reckless, and entirely undeserved. A tear escaped his eye. It burned on his cheek like confession. "You weren't supposed to do this," he whispered. "You're not supposed to risk you." Ava stirred faintly. He leaned closer. "You said no one saw you," he whispered. "But I do. I see everything now. Not the CEO, not the public face, but the woman who walked through fire for a child who wasn't hers." Her lips parted, barely a breath. "She is." James froze. Ava opened her eyes slowly. "She is. Mine too." He exhaled shakily, overcome. "You could have died." "You would have," she replied. And just like that, the storm inside him shattered. James bowed his head, forehead resting against her hand, silent tears running into her skin. In all his years of war, of loss, of surgeries done in tents and triage units, he'd never cried like this. Because it wasn't just about saving Amelia. It was about someone choosing to save her. Someone choosing him. Later that morning, as dawn peeked through the storm clouds, Amelia woke to find her father asleep in a chair beside Ava's bed, their hands still intertwined. She tiptoed into the room, wrapped in a hospital blanket. She paused at the doorway, watching them. She didn't speak, didn't move. She just smiled. Because even a child could see what two broken adults could not. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the beginning of healing. Together. The sun had barely risen when James knocked on Ava's door. No fanfare, no entourage. Just him, in a soft gray sweater, worn jeans, and that same quiet gravity that always made the noise of the world seem to hush around him. Ava opened the door, her face still pale, but her eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. "Get dressed," he said gently. "I want to show you something." The drive was quiet, scenic. He didn't say where they were going, and she didn't ask. It was the first time in years she had allowed herself to surrender, not to a man, but to a moment. They stopped near a quiet beach, still slick from the recent rains. The waves were gentle, brushing the sand with the kind of grace that only time could perfect. Ava stepped out barefoot, letting the sea wind tangle her hair. James walked beside her, close but not touching. The silence between them was rich, not awkward, not empty, but full of all the things that didn't need to be said. "You used to come here?" she asked. He nodded. "Before Amelia. Before the war. When I still believed that fixing things meant they stayed fixed." A small laugh escaped her lips. "And now? Now I know some things break to make room for something better." She turned to him, suddenly serious. "Why did you really bring me here?" James exhaled, searching her face as if memorizing it. "Because I needed you to see where I made a promise once, and I want to make another." Her heart thudded. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple seashell, smooth, white, unremarkable. But in his hand, it looked sacred. "When I was stationed overseas," he began, "every time I thought I wouldn't make it back, I'd imagine this place, this sound. The ocean doesn't demand anything from you. It just keeps going, no matter who leaves." He took her hand, gently, reverently. "If you make it through this, if you're still standing when this war is over, I want to marry you, Ava." The waves paused for her answer. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just smiled. Small, quiet, and true. "No one's ever chosen me," she whispered, "not without knowing what I could give in return. Not without strings." James's voice dropped. "I'm not here for your empire. I'm here because you walked into a burning house to save my daughter. I'm here because you make me feel like I still have something left to fight for. And because when you're not in the room, nothing else makes sense anymore." She leaned her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the salty air. "You're insane," she said softly. "And yet, here you are." Back in the hospital 2 days later, the final round of tests came in. Dr. Leland, the hematologist who had overseen Ava's condition, stood at the edge of her bed with a look somewhere between astonishment and disbelief. "I don't know how to explain it," he said. "Your body's no longer responding to James's blood, which is a good thing." James stiffened. "You mean it's rejecting it?" "No," Leland replied, holding up the chart. "I mean it's not needing it anymore. Your immune system, it's evolved, adapted. The antibodies your body developed have compensated for the deficiency. In medical terms, you've stabilized." Ava blinked, stunned. "You're saying you're in remission," the doctor said with a soft smile. "Maybe even cured. And it happened faster than we've ever documented in a patient with your condition." James looked at her, eyes wide. Ava was speechless. Leland continued, closing the chart. "Sometimes the body just decides it wants to live." The room was silent as he left, leaving the weight of those words hanging in the air like a miracle too fragile to name. That night, as the city lights flickered beneath the hospital window, Ava stood beside James with her arms crossed. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of living like this isn't temporary, of hoping." James turned to her, placing his hand over her heart. "You've survived boardrooms, lawsuits, betrayal, a failing body. You think hope is where you draw the line?" She laughed, this time with her whole chest. Then she reached up, brushing her fingers against the side of his face. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. When you propose again, do it on a day that isn't soaked in needles and test results." He smiled. "Deal." "But James?" "Yeah?" She leaned in, resting her head against his chest, eyes closed. "I already said yes." The ocean still waited for them, and this time, when they returned, they would walk not as strangers who saved each other, but as two people who had learned the most powerful truth of all. Love isn't meant to be logical. It's meant to be real. The attic was dusty, quiet, and soaked in golden afternoon light slanting through the narrow window. James knelt beside an old cedar chest, the kind that still smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Amelia sat cross-legged next to him, her small hands brushing dust from the lid. "You sure you want to open it now, Dad?" James hesitated. The chest hadn't been opened since the funeral, maybe not even since before the diagnosis. But something in Ava's near death, something in the way she had given her blood without hesitation to save Amelia, had unsealed more than a debt. It had unsealed his heart. He nodded, lifting the lid. Inside, perfectly preserved in neat bundles wrapped with ribbon, were letters. Dozens of them. Some yellowed, some crisp. Some written in thick marker with silly hearts, others in delicate cursive. Amelia reached for the top one. "To you, for someday," she read aloud, and handed it to her father. James unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. He instantly recognized Emily's handwriting, his late wife, steady and elegant, like the woman herself. He read in silence, his eyes moving slowly across every word, his heart catching in his throat. "James, if you're reading this, I suppose I'm not there anymore, which breaks me to even imagine. But if you are, I hope you're sitting in sunlight. I hope Amelia is nearby, and I hope you haven't let the world close your heart forever. If you've found someone new, and I pray that you have, love her the way you loved me. Fully, fearlessly. Don't hold back. I know how loyal you are. But loyalty doesn't mean building a shrine to the past. It means honoring the love we had, by living. And if she ever doubts how deeply you can love, tell her. Tell her you once loved a woman so much, you stayed up every night for weeks, memorizing the rhythm of her breathing, afraid it might stop. Tell her you held her hand through pain so bad it blurred the edges of her world, and you never once let go. Tell her you were a soldier, a healer, a husband, and that you are still all three. If you still have the ring, give it to her. Or better yet, give her a new one that says, I choose you, now, fully. Because love is not a second chance, it's another beginning. James didn't move. His breath caught on something too old and too sacred to name. His chest ached, but not with sorrow. It ached with peace. That night, he pulled out a tiny velvet box he'd hidden for months. Not the old ring, though he'd kept that too, tucked safely in his wallet like a relic. This was new. A simple platinum band with a small diamond set low and strong. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. But it felt like her. Ava. Solid, radiant, quietly powerful. Amelia looked up from the edge of the bed where she sat in pajamas. Is that for Ava? James nodded. His daughter smiled. I think Mom would be proud. I hope so. She paused, then added, She told me once, right before the hospital, that if anything happened, I had to remind you. You're allowed to live again. I just didn't know what she meant. Until I saw you with Ava. James swallowed the lump in his throat. Thank you for reminding me. The next morning, James stood outside the Whitmore building. A familiar ache twisted in his gut, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. He entered through the service door, the same way he had the first time, back when he was just the anonymous donor, the reluctant savior. Now, every step felt lighter, more sure. Ava's office was quiet when he arrived. She sat alone at the massive window, sunlight streaming through the glass, casting long shadows across the floor. She turned when she heard his footsteps. Their eyes met, and in that moment, nothing needed to be said. Still, James reached into his coat pocket and held out the box. Ava blinked. "Is that—" He opened it slowly, revealing the ring. "I read a letter yesterday," he said, voice thick with emotion. "From Emily." Ava's eyes softened. She said love isn't about replacing the past. It's about choosing the present, fully. And Ava, I'm choosing you. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she stood, walked over, and took his hand. "I thought I knew what power meant," she whispered. "Contracts, boardrooms, empires. But it's this. Right now, knowing someone sees you, all of you, and still chooses you." James slid the ring onto her finger. "I don't know where life will take us," he said, "but I want to walk there beside you." She smiled. "Then let's start walking." Outside, the city moved as it always did, fast, loud, relentless. But inside that office, two people stood still, holding hands, holding a future. A past had finally been honored, and a new chapter, not just of healing but of hope, had begun. The garden had changed over the years, but not in the ways that mattered. The same old oak tree still spread its arms like a sentinel. The flower beds, lovingly tended by nurses and volunteers, bloomed with late spring roses, tulips, and morning glories. A small wooden bench, faded by sun and time, stood under the pergola, quiet, dignified, as if remembering the woman who once sat there every evening, waiting for a miracle that never came. Today, it would witness a different kind of miracle. A white aisle had been woven between the flower beds. Folding chairs lined both sides, filled with quiet onlookers, nurses, doctors, friends, and people whose lives had somehow brushed against James or Ava. Even the janitor who once helped James with his ID badge sat respectfully in the back, wearing his Sunday best. At the far end of the aisle, James stood in a tailored navy suit, his military posture softened by a gentleness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Beside him, Amelia adjusted the boutonniere on his lapel, her hands calm and precise. "You look nervous," she teased. "I'm not," he said. "Liar," she smiled. "But you look happy." He bent and kissed the top of her head. "That I am." Music began, soft piano notes drifting through the garden speakers. Then all heads turned. Ava stepped into view. She wore a simple, elegant white gown, off the shoulder, flowing, with lace details that caught the sunlight like dew on petals. Her hair fell in soft waves, and in her eyes glowed something no business empire, no contract, no fortune could ever buy. Peace. On her arm stood Alfred Whitmore, still tall, still formidable, but now with tears shining unashamedly in his eyes. As they walked slowly down the aisle, Ava whispered, "You sure you're ready to give me away?" Alfred gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "I'm not giving you away," he murmured. "I'm handing you to someone who deserves you." When they reached the end, Alfred looked at James, not with the cold scrutiny of a CEO vetting an applicant, but with the weary gratitude of a father whose daughter had finally been saved. Not by science, but by something stronger. He placed Ava's hand into James's and whispered, "Take care of my little girl." "I already am," James replied. The officiant's voice faded as Amelia stepped forward, a folded paper in her hands. She stood in front of the small crowd, cleared her throat and began. "When I was little, I thought miracles only happened in labs. I used to think love was just another thing that gets taken away when people get sick or hurt. But then something happened. A woman I didn't know gave her blood for me, and a man I've known my whole life gave his heart to someone new. Today isn't about a perfect wedding. It's about two people who walked through fire, who lost everything, and still chose to believe. There are miracles science can't explain, like a CEO giving up power for love or a soldier learning to smile again. My dad once told me the bravest thing you can do is love again after losing everything. So here's to brave love. Here's to choosing kindness over control. And here's to the kind of miracle that starts not in a lab, but in someone's heart. She stepped back, her voice trembling but proud. The crowd fell silent, the weight of her words lingering like sunlight after rain. Ava turned to James. "I thought I needed a cure," she said, her voice breaking. "But what I really needed was someone who saw me, not as a CEO, not as a patient, but just me." James took her hand. "You were never broken, Ava. You were just tired of holding everything alone." They exchanged vows, simple, heartfelt. Ava's. "I vow to never hide behind numbers and headlines again. I vow to love not from behind walls, but with open hands." James's. "I vow to walk beside you, not ahead, not behind, to protect, to laugh, to listen, and to remind you every day that you are not alone." Then came the ring. James slipped it on her finger, just like the promise he'd made by that hospital bed not long ago. The crowd erupted in quiet, joyful applause. From a distance, behind the stone trellis, a solitary figure stood watching. Andrew. His suit was sharp, his expression unreadable. But when Ava smiled at James, genuine, radiant, unguarded, Andrew closed his eyes for a beat, then turned and walked away. No bitterness, just acceptance. Because some stories aren't about winning back what was lost, but letting go so something better can begin. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, guests began to scatter. Laughter bubbled in quiet corners. Children played tag near the rose beds. Someone turned on soft jazz near the refreshment table. Ava sat with James beneath the old oak tree, where once he had held his grief. Now he held her hand. Amelia ran toward them, her dress stained with cake and joy. "Come dance with me," she called. James stood, pulled Ava up with him. "We're terrible dancers," he whispered. "I don't care," Ava laughed. Neither did he. In that garden, where once sorrow had bloomed, joy finally took root. And in the simplest of vows, whispered not just before witnesses, but before the past itself, a new chapter began. Years had passed. The city skyline had grown taller, glass and steel rising like promises fulfilled. But beneath the towering progress, something deeper had taken root, something that couldn't be measured in stock prices or patents. It was called Blood of Hope. What started as a quiet initiative, just a few refrigerated trucks, some borrowed lab space, and a mission, had become a network of rare blood banks across the country. Hospitals that once turned patients away for lack of matching donors now had a chance to say yes. Lives that once flickered on the edge now burned bright. And at the center of it all stood James Whitmore and Ava Hale, no longer defined by titles, illness, or past regrets. They were simply healers, builders, parents, believers. On the 20th anniversary of the foundation, the Whitmore Memorial Hospital buzzed with activity. A banner fluttered at the entrance. "Every drop a miracle. Every heart a home." Inside, a dozen new donors waited quietly in the clean, white waiting room. Some were nervous. Some wore brave smiles. All were here because they'd heard of a woman who once nearly died, until one man's anonymous blood gave her another chance. That woman now walked the halls as if they were her own. Ava. She had aged, but gracefully. Her strength had returned long ago. But what softened her now wasn't weakness. It was joy. She passed the playroom, where young patients were coloring murals of hearts and red droplets, pausing for a moment before entering a private room where a young woman sat waiting. The patient was no older than 20, pale, fragile, hands trembling in her lap as the IV line ran gently into her vein. Ava knocked lightly and entered. "Hi," she said with a warm smile. "Mind if I sit with you for a minute?" The girl nodded, eyes wide. "I'm told you're receiving your first unit today. I know it can feel scary." I just wanted to ask," the girl whispered. The nurse said it's a rare match. Who gave this to me?" Behind her, the door creaked softly. A woman in a white coat stepped in. Amelia. Her eyes carried the calm of someone who had seen miracles, and the strength of someone who once needed one herself. She walked over to the patient, checking the monitor briefly, then knelt to eye level. "My father," she said gently. "It's his blood you're receiving." The girl's lips parted in awe. "He must be an incredible man." Amelia smiled. "He is. But if you ask him, he'll say that blood never really belonged to him." "What does he mean?" Amelia looked toward the window, where light spilled across the floor like a benediction. Her voice softened. "He'd tell you. It belongs to the woman who taught him what it means to love again. The woman who gave his life back to him." The girl blinked, confused but comforted. Then she smiled. That night, James sat alone on a bench outside the hospital's glass atrium. A sculpture in the garden bore the names of hundreds of patients saved through blood of hope. But his eyes weren't on the stone. They were on the stars. Ava joined him quietly, slipping her hand into his. "She okay?" he asked. "She will be." They sat in silence, wrapped in a peace earned through fire and loss, through forgiveness and second chances. Ava leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what you told me once? About not being a miracle?" James chuckled. "Unfortunately, yes." "You were wrong," she said, lifting her face to his. "You were the miracle I never saw coming." He smiled, eyes glinting with emotion. "And you were the reason I started breathing again." Amelia stood in the hallway, watching them from a distance. She held a clipboard in one hand and a photo in the other, her mother's wedding picture. In the soft light, the resemblance between the two women was almost haunting. But the love that radiated from the scene before her, between James and Ava, was something uniquely their own. She whispered under her breath, "You were right, Mom. He found his way." Later that evening, during the closing ceremony of the anniversary gala, a young boy took the stage, nervously clutching a note. He had been saved by blood of hope, and he wanted to say thank you. "My mom told me that sometimes heroes don't wear capes," he read, voice shaking. "Sometimes they just roll up their sleeves. One drop saved my life, but that drop came from someone with a big heart. So, thank you, whoever you are." He paused, looked toward James and Ava in the front row. "And I hope one day I'll grow up to be the kind of person who gives, like you did." The applause was thunderous, but James didn't clap. He simply looked at Ava, his eyes full, his heart overflowing. She reached for his hand, and together they smiled, quietly, humbly, completely. Epilogue. Above the entrance of the Blood of Hope Center now hangs a plaque. It reads, "One drop saves a life. One heart heals a soul. In memory of those we lost, and in honor of those who chose to give." And if you ask anyone why it works, why strangers from all walks of life show up to donate, they'll point to two people who turned pain into purpose and grief into grace. Not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to forgive, to love, to begin again. And that was their story. A story that reminds us, sometimes a single act of kindness, even as small as giving blood, can change not just a life, but a legacy. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Share with us in the comments below. Your stories, your presence, mean the world to us. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more tales that inspire, heal, and remind us all of the goodness still out there. Thank you for spending your time with us. Wishing you peace, love, and a heart full of hope. Until next time.